Hello, Marvel fans. Thank you for tuning back in for another breakdown review for WandaVision. Today we're looking at episode 8, and I'll just say it right now that you might as well go get the tissues ready. Somewhat for this episode, as there are a lot of touching and intimate moments, but also because it's pointing to a not-so-fairy tale ending for our beloved Wanda in the upcoming finale. Before diving in, if you haven't already, you would truly make this fellow fan's day if you were to hit subscribe and that notifications bell so you can always stay up to date with the future breakdowns, reviews, theories, and so on and so forth. Now, as the episode goes to kick off, we see a cool color switch on the Marvel logo as it fades from its original red to purple, insinuating that Agatha's magic is at large in this episode. And that it is. Everything begins in Salem, Massachusetts, 1693, where we find Agatha being brought to a stake and asked if she's a witch. And she's like, "You damn right I am." But notice, she wasn't tied up to the stake with a good old rope you would find in the 1600s, but instead, they used some blue magic handcuffs. And before you can begin to ask yourself what's going on here, the old lady leading the whole thing starts to throw Agatha under the bus for betraying her coven and practicing the darkest of magics. Agatha refuses at first, claiming to be oblivious to all this, but then quickly drops the act and is like, "Alright, you got me." So her fellow witches start up a chant together and she starts to panic a bit, pleading with the old lady who is revealed to be her mother. What? Who then joins in on the chant. But it's important to note here that Agatha doesn't appear to be quite 100% evil, as she begs the members of her coven to teach and help her. All the witches fire out some blue beams into Agatha, seemingly overwhelming her with their combined power, at least for a moment. Before long, those blue beams start to turn purple as it appears Agatha's magic absorbs theirs and then sucks the life out of them, leaving them looking like a bunch of groupies of the Crypt Keeper. Agatha's mother remains, and her daughter tries to convince her that she could be good, even though she just totally killed all the other witches there, and her mom's like, nah. So Agatha also turns her mom to a Crypt Keeper groupie, and she flies off with her brooch, transitioning us back into Agatha's basement. Now, before I move on with the episode, I find it interesting that they seem to be hinting that Agatha is perhaps nowhere near as old as her comic book counterpart. It's never fully established, but you kind of get a vibe like she's not a seasoned vet yet, and she could very well still be in her earlier years of witchery, and I think they try to further this by having her mother there. I hope that isn't the case. I would love to hear her reminisce of seeing the fall of Atlantis, partially because it'd be a cool story, but also because that would hint at the potential inclusion of Namor at some point down the line. So back in the creepy basement, Agatha briefly chats with her bunny about how surprised Wanda is that she knows her identity, which is basically like, alright, that has got to be her son, Nicholas Scratch. In the comics, Nicholas is a powerful and villainous sorcerer that goes on to actually have quite a feud with his mother and worships and follows the likes of Mephisto and Dormammu, and I found it to be too on the nose to be a coincidence that she named her furry pet Senior Scratchy. Wanda attempts to read Agatha's mind, but Agatha's like, nuh-uh, and then Sokovianly asks where the twins are, and Agatha takes a jab at how her accent really seems to sporadically come and go. Wanda gets pissed and goes to use some magic, but she can't. Agatha uses her own to restrain and hold up Wanda, and points out that the room they're in has basic protection spells on each wall. They show brief glances at these different symbols on the walls highlighted in purple, and interestingly enough, one of them very much resembles the House of M logo, which is one of the comic book runs this show has taken some inspiration from. Wanda clearly doesn't understand what's happening here, and Agatha is baffled that she doesn't know the fundamentals of magic. Wanda's like, "Who are you?" And Agatha retorts with a much more intrigued, "Who are you?" Going on to explain how she had been patiently waiting for Wanda to reveal her true self and got oh so close with fake Pietro. I find it important to note that Agatha mentions Pietro wasn't her in disguise, but rather a spell was cast on him to be her eyes and ears, which I think is something that, even though I've been running circles in my head about this for the past couple of weeks, can further the thought of this Pietro still being Pietro. Well, Peter Maximoff, that we originally met in the X-Men universe. And if that is indeed the case, then there's definitely no reason we couldn't see other pre-existing mutants from recent X-Men films pop over to the MCU sooner than later, which I have mixed emotions about. I think they did a relatively decent good job with a good portion of the casting over at Fox, but at this point, I'd much rather just see Marvel recast and reboot their storylines. It's hard to gauge how well most of the X-Men and Fox's latest films would be able to hold their own in the MCU. Not that they appeared to be weak, just inconsistent. They were teenagers acting like adults who were still in the midst of sharpening their skills and honing their powers, but then somehow managed to defeat Apocalypse, who could easily be considered the Thanos of X-Men villains. And let's not even discuss the piss-poor second attempt at the Dark Phoenix storyline. So I'd rather just wipe the slate clean and start fresh. Or really, the best part about all this is they can kind of cherry pick whoever they feel would work best, and then just introduce new versions of the rest, because that's the beauty of the multiverse and reality warping superheroes. Limitations kind of go out the window. We finally discover that the reason Agatha is here is because she sensed the afterglow of all the different spells that were cast to create the hex, and then performs a few magic tricks of her own for Wanda. But not for entertainment, to prove how difficult it is to gain the knowledge and power to perform these tasks, putting Wanda's fantasy sitcom and taking over a whole town in perspective. Basically, Agatha seems to very much envy Wanda's abilities and needs to know how she's pulling this off. But Wanda keeps sticking with the I don't know story. Agatha magically smacks her around a bit, takes a strand of her hair, and uses a spell to open up a doorway to Wanda's past memories. First up, the night that changed everything for the OG Maximoff twins, as we get to experience the horrific evening they made mention of in Age of Ultron. They enter an apartment, and we see a couple that we quickly find out are Wanda's parents. Her father, Oleg, has a briefcase of DVDs of most of the sitcoms that Wanda's been basing her false reality on, providing a bit of explanation as to why she created things in the fashion she did. A little Pietro pops out and calls for Wanda, who walks forward and reverts into a younger version of herself. As Oleg goes to put on Wanda's favorite show, Dick Van Dyke, her mother notices gunfire and war across the street, but uneasily disregards it and goes back to the family. I found the next moment here to be really touching and heartwarming, as well as giving us even more clarification behind why we've seen all the sitcom moments that we have, as those moments are mirrored in the episode of Dick Van Dyke, and it's noticeably clear that Wanda gets so much enjoyment and solace out of watching these shows with her family. But just as life teaches us all in the harshest of manners, all good things must come to an end, and her happiness gets cut short by a massive explosion. She regains consciousness, and her and little Pietro are met with a Stark Industries bomb. The one that sat there for 2 days and never went off, and she always believed it was because the bomb was defective. But what hands down ends up being the most compelling revelation of this scene is that the bomb apparently wasn't defective, and we discover Wanda has always had latent abilities, as it's insinuated that she unknowingly used a probability hex to stop the bomb, proving that the Tesseract did not give her powers, but more so unlocked and enhanced them. Fun little side fact, from what I can find, probability hexes are the first sign of magic Wanda displayed in the comics. Now this also raises the question as to whether it was the same kind of situation for Pietro. Did he also always have powers but then had them enhanced by the Mind Stone? Is this due to the Maximoff twins having the X gene within them? Could that be the explanation as to why only Wanda and Pietro survived the Strucker experiments? Moving on. Door number 2 materializes, and then we get to visit the Baron Strucker experiments, where Wanda had her direct contact with the Tesseract. What's unique about this situation is that Wanda didn't even have to walk up to the Tesseract, as it literally floats on its own out of Loki's scepter and up to Wanda, breaking out of its blue shell and revealing the golden yellow glow of the Mind Stone. And as Wanda squints into the light, she sees a silhouette of the Scarlet Witch image comic book fans would be awfully familiar with. It gave me a very Phoenix Force vibe, but purely because it looked like solar flares were firing off behind her. I feel it's also worth noting that the people experimenting on Wanda go to view the footage of the insanity that just took place, but it only shows her walking in the room and then dropping to the floor, completely cutting out the only part they cared about. Memory show host Agatha has a theory and decides it's now time to see what's behind door number 3, which ends up being at the Avengers compound, dealing with the direct aftermath of the events of Age of Ultron and the death of Pietro. The real Pietro. Well, her real Pietro. You get my point. Vision makes his best effort to comfort Wanda as they sit together watching Malcolm in the Middle, and it appears to be that this moment was the first that they started to form a genuine bond. Agatha ruins the moment by recapping the list of traumatic events up to this point, and continues to interrogate Wanda as she's on the precipice of remembering how she managed to pull this whole thing off, which is what nice and neatly brings us to door number 4, showing us the day Wanda stole Vision's body from the sword facility. Or did she? After a discussion with Hayward and getting a chance to see the remains of his corpse for herself, which is incredibly sad by the way, she leaves. Other than breaking the glass window to get down from the second to the first floor, she did no other damage and caused no harm. So, let us pause for a moment here and discuss exactly what this is unveiling. Director Tyler Hayward, you self-absorbed lying sack of sardine sandwiches. How do you sleep at night? Look everyone, I've got footage to prove she's actually evil. How could you stand up for someone that went against their significant other's living will? How absurdly immature to just point the finger and be like, nah, she did it. This means he secretly had Vision's body stashed away this entire time, huh? Wonder if we're gonna find out what he did with it. I also want to point out that director Douchebag is quite possibly part to blame for this whole escapade, since during the conversation with Wanda, while showing her Vision's disassembled body, he questions her intent with desiring to take the remains, noting not many people have the power to bring the ones they love back to life. Now when he says this, she's like, I can't do that, but then also kind of gives a look of like, wait a second, can I? So, if it wasn't for his indirect attempt at inception, this might have gone at least the slightest bit differently. But this should make you think, if she didn't take Vision's body from the facility, how the hell is Vision inside the Hex? Wanda drives off from the facility and into the regular-looking pre-Hex Westview, where we get glimpses of many of the characters from her sitcom as plain old people. She parks in front of an empty lot within the neighborhood, and we find out that Vision had picked out this property for the two of them to grow old in. And this is the straw that breaks the camel's back, folks. She breaks down in the middle of where their dream house was supposed to be, and ragefully yells out her emotions, releasing a wave of red magic upon all of Westview, turning it into the black and white 50s era setting we saw in the first episode. To top it all off, she miraculously manages to pump out her own vision, and what's very peculiar here is when she's creating her own vision from scratch, her red magic blends and turns into a yellow energy, effectively showing that the force behind a large portion of both Vision and Wanda's powers is the yellow Mind Stone. At the end of it all, Wanda turns back into black and white as well, and we essentially see where the show initially kicks off. All of a sudden, we see the studio lights and Agatha being the lone member of the audience, clapping away, then disappearing. Then we start to hear Tommy and Billy in the distance cry out for their mother's help. Wanda runs outside to the street to see Agatha in full witch costume now, holding the boys hostage by their necks with some purple magic ropes, telling Wanda that after the whole rundown, she now knows what she is and how Wanda doesn't realize the danger she poses to herself and everyone around her. Agatha claims she was supposed to be a myth, a being capable of spontaneous creation who uses chaos magic, summing her up to be the Scarlet Witch. Which I found to be a very nice way of integrating her comic book alias into the MCU without just randomly giving it to her as a nickname. Then the episode ends. Or does it? Nope. We get presented with our second mid-credit scene of the show, and this one is bound to set up a wave of inevitable sadness for those that are familiar with this from the comics. We're brought back over to the temporary sword base located right outside the Hex, and see director Douchebag talking about how they finally found a power source to make his secret project function. Turns out the secret sauce is funneling Wanda's magic that was still resonating on the drone she zapped in episode 5 over to the, ready for this, freshly reassembled body of Vision, topped off with a fresh coat of a haunting white. He activates, and then the episode ends quickly after. And there you have it. That's the breakdown of Previously on. Get ready to get miserable, everyone, because even though this can go multiple ways, they're all bound to be depressing ones. In the comic book storyline Vision Quest, the all-white Vision is one that was also reassembled without his original personality, though in those stories he obtained his persona via the brainwaves of Wonder Man as opposed to the AI of Jarvis, and became a heartless, emotionless version of the synthesoid we've come to know and love. He has no feelings and no memories of his past relationship with Wanda, and this just rips her apart on the inside. As if she wasn't torn apart enough at this point. I'm super curious what reaction there's going to be when White Vision enters the Hex, or if there's going to be any reaction at all. So far, every single object other than the 80s drone sent in has been altered to fit the current timeline of the sitcom. But the sitcom appears to be over, and even if it were still going, they seem to have caught up with present-day times. So is he just going to walk right through with no issues? This also helps explain why the Vision we've been watching can't leave the Hex. Being created from Wanda's magic directly related to the phenomena, it makes sense as to why his physical form wouldn't be able to endure outside of it. And that just also leads to another point of sorrow, as that means there's no way we're going to see him survive past this show. Once the Hex is gone, it would seem he would dissipate as well. But I do have a theory on what could happen in the finale to potentially remedy this issue. Hear me out. Now, I imagine that it's unavoidable that we're going to see Wanda face off against Vision the Friendly Ghost in the finale, but I also hope we're going to get to see Vision versus Vision, and I have a feeling if that does go down, White Vision may most likely end up taking Colored-in Vision out, which of course would tear Wanda apart, and probably lead to an epic battle where she eventually defeats White Vision, which, by the way, would add to a total of Vision having died 5 times on screen, 4 of which have been witnessed or caused by Wanda. But I'm theorizing that she may end up fast-tracking the events of the comic book plot I was just referring to, as in those stories, White Vision eventually does regain his personality. So What if Wanda uses her ever-growing powers to place her homemade Vision's individuality inside of the White Vision's body at the end of this entire debacle? It's one of the only legitimate and logical ways I could think of as to how Vision could stick around for future shows and movies. Now the problem here is that this almost guarantees that Wanda's children have either been created in a similar and unintentional fashion as the colored in Vision was, or that they're actually shards of the soul of Mephisto. It's still not too late. He could technically pop up in the finale and be the big bad in the Doctor Strange sequel, but this is just another perspective tally in the Wanda's impending grief category, as anyone, especially a mother, can imagine how heart-wrenching it would be to have your kids simply fade out of existence. I'm really trying to gauge what Agatha's endgame is here. Does she believe Wanda to be too powerful to be left alive? Or is she trying to show her that her powers can make her so much more, potentially training her as she does in the comics? And where the hell is fake Pietro, or whoever he really is? Where's Monica? Where's Vision? How long were Agatha and Wanda in Memoryville? Keep 'em coming, you say? Sure thing! Is Director Hayward really Director Hayward, or is he possibly a Skrull in disguise? I ask this since there already seems to be a decent number of connections to Captain Marvel, and it would seem to be that an interesting and logical choice for the MCU to move in overall would be the story of the Secret Invasion, where we essentially find out that the Skrulls are everywhere, and have been for quite some time. And another incredibly intriguing detail I wanted to bring up to you all was wondering who would voice this new White Vision in the finale. Now, this is something I didn't initially put together, but then I started to think about it more and more, and it does make sense that Vision would no longer be voiced by Paul Bettany, as he doesn't have the AI personality of Jarvis any longer. Could this maybe be a secret return of James Spader? What if this is the unplanned recreation of Ultron? I mean, really, this version of Vision is what Ultron was trying to create in the first place, so it doesn't seem too far off. All I know is, everyone better be on their toes, because this Vision ain't messing around. There's about to be injuries and shit. Lastly, I'm going to go on record, as many people already have, in stating I believe that Doctor Strange will make an appearance in the last episode. Now, I don't think he's going to come in and save the day. I feel the writers know damn well that would take away from the character development set in place. Rather, I think he's going to be the big surprise for the finale's mid-credit scene, because we all know there's going to be one. I think it's going to show us how Wanda is grieving from whatever events just finished wrapping up, unsure of how to cope, and thinking that maybe, just maybe, this whole mess is behind her, until we see a portal open to witness Doctor Strange stepping out to drop a line or two. The show is doing a great job of setting itself up to go out with a bang. Oh, so many questions, and only one episode left to answer them. I'm super excited for the last episode, and I'm even more excited to break it down and review it with you all. Leave your comments and theories on everything down below. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed the content, and I'll catch up with you all after the finale.